Hi. So let us start with knight f3 variations. We have just studied all other sidelines, all other moves in knight f3. As you can see, there is nothing really dangerous for black. Of course, there are a couple of maybe lines which white can try to fight for advantage. Black has to know at least certain theory, certain details, but all in all, definitely any other moves than knight f3 will not cause you stop playing Sicilian. Well, knight f3 also will not, and I will do my best to explain you why during the next lessons, but still knight f3 is definitely the most dangerous move. White is trying normally to play d4 to fight for the center. So the structure of today's lesson will be first I'm going to show you sidelines for black. Black actually has three main moves here, which is knight c6, d6 and e6. I will show you all other moves black has in this position. None of it is really great, and white is actually better in in every other line. But anyway, you need to know, you at least for the white color, if you're playing white Sicilian. And then in the second half of this lesson, I will, before going into details of each of those three major moves, I'm going to explain you the whole structure of the Sicilian. So what kind of systems black has, and what kind of sidelines white has in return, and then you can have a general structure. And because there are quite many tricky move orders or possible transpositions from one line to another, and I think it's very important that before we start checking main lines, that you have a very good general understanding of who is aiming for what. Yeah, so let's say if black plays knight c6, then he cannot anymore play neither, for instance, etc., etc. Yeah, so it's important. Then we start slowly, one by one, investigating each of those systems. It will take time, but we are not in a hurry. The Sicilian is a very complex and complicated opening, so we will do it slowly but surely. But for now, let's check what are the other options for black after knight f3. Well, let's start with really bad moves. D5 is simply not working here. E takes d5, queen takes d5, knight c3, and queen goes back, d4, and actually it's much worse than Scandinavian. White is simply much better here. So this is out of question, not recommended even in 1 minute bullet games. Then another, very dubious move, to put it mildly, is b6, because white can simply play d4 among other moves, of course. And then here it just finally gets to a pretty bad version of Sicilian, because in any case in Sicilian, black should normally sooner or later try to play a6, b5. And then playing b6, black just lost a tempi. Yeah? So let's say a6. Now practically any system gives white an advantage, but the most, I would say, the most principle is to play bishop e3, f3, queen d2, and black will sooner or later play b5 and just be tempi down in a system which is pretty dangerous anyway. Yeah? So b6 is also not a good move. Definitely. Then a6. A6 is not that bad, actually. It's not that bad. Even though, of course, gives white a nice choice of possible options. Here, for instance, c4 is always playable. E6, knight c3, because black cannot stop white from playing d4, and white will get some kind of positions which are similar to Paulsen system. I will show it later to you. So then it's not, by the way, quite clear why to start with a6. But actually, if this is not the only problem after a6, the main point of a6 is that after d4, black wants to take on d4, play knight f6, and in case of knight c3, he has e5. That is the idea why a6 is played on move 2, that white usually respond with knight b5 after e5. Here this square is protected. But actually, even this, which was supposed to be a wrong way for white to play, that after a6 you just shouldn't play d4. Yeah, that was what I was taught in the childhood. But in fact, maybe white is still a bit better. So he can play knight e2. Black probably should play bishop c5 to activate his bishop. But this also, by the way, not clear if it's enough for equality, because knight g3, and after d6, white is in time, very important to maneuver his bishop to b3. And even though the knight position of the knight on g3 is a bit strange, but still black has to prove that he had equalized. And actually there is another option for white to play bishop d3 here already, and after e5, let's say knight b3, white also wants probably to put pawn on c4 at some point. So d5, e d5, and maybe it's still not totally equal for black. So actually third d4 is not a mistake, it's a perfectly playable move. But the main problem, in my opinion, is second c3. Because here, of course, after knight f6, c5, knight d5, let's say, okay, it's practically a tempi up already for white. Yeah, the c3 line, and I suppose white should just be better here after d4, bishop c4. So that is not good anymore. e6 is also at least dubious, because after d4, d5, white simply plays e5, and having a very good version of the French defense with third d5, because knight f3 is a useful move, is anyway always played, but a6 is almost loss of tempi. So black is not in time here to organize his quick counterattack on the pawn on d4, and white is simply better here. So probably the only reasonable way of playing for black here is d5. Well, of course, the idea is that after e5, black will play, let's say, knight c6, d4, and as usual, get his bishop to g4, and that is fine for black. But the problem is e d5. Yeah, e d5, queen takes d5, d4, and we are getting to the previous lessons. e4, c5, c3, d5 system. The only difference is that black played unnecessary move a6, or it is a useful move, but it's clear that it's played a bit too early, so white is having a very nice plus in this position. So to me, c3 is the most unpleasant move after e6. So all in all, e6, well, can be played. It's not dramatically bad, but of course it doesn't fully equalize. And then another sideline, I would say, is knight f6. Frankly, doesn't make much sense to me. Why? Because to start with, e5 is a pretty dangerous system here, and probably leading to an advantage for white. Knight d5, knight c3. And now, well, taking on c3, let's say knight e6, bishop f4, it's pretty clear that white has a, well, very nice position and certain advantage in development, and simply not clear why black lost all those tempis. Finally maneuvering the knight from g8 to exchange it to c3, white is better here. That's why e6 is the main line supposed to be. And now white, by the way, has other options than knight takes d5, but that is good enough. Takes on d5 and d4. In case of d6, white should be at least slightly better, just playing healthy chess, check on b5 castles, and let's say in case of bishop e7, computer likes c4 very much, even though other moves would also leave white with a certain plus, but c4 is very unpleasant. Therefore, maybe black should go for this old force line, knight c6. Again, force if white wants. If not, white can do other things in this position, like playing c3, for example. But of course, very principle is taking this pawn, and now there is this variation which has to be investigated, has to be checked further with modern engines. It's very dangerous for black, but maybe black can hold. I'm not totally sure. For example, white has pretty safe way of playing is queen e4 check, bishop e6, queen h4, just protecting the pawn on f2. All in all, this is anyway not really playing for a win with black, because white is pretty safe in all those lines. So e5 is a very serious challenge, but the worst thing of which discourages, I think, all players of playing knight f6 is that if white just plays knight c3, there is probably nothing better for black than to play d6 and move to Najdorf or Rauser, whatever, to the main Sicilian. So white can, of course, go d4. Well, yes, maybe you removed certain sidelines like bishop b5 check after second d6, but you gave a very dangerous, so to say, sideline e5. So doesn't look like a great deal for black, because after knight c3, d5 was played earlier, more often, but now it's practically refuted. I think white is just better after d5. More than one way. The simplest is e takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop b5 check. If I remember well, Yasser Seiravan played knight c6 against me here in Amsterdam, 96. But nowadays engine simply says that you can castle, knight c3, bc3, and already giving white quite a considerable advantage in this position. And bishop d7, there is a direct line, knight e5, bishop takes b5, queen f3, threatening mate on f7, and after f6, knight takes b5. So it's nice tactics, because if f3, queen takes d5, white is getting the piece back, and equal material in this endgame he is much better because of the ruined pawn structure which black has. Black have tried in pre-computer era to make some murky business with knight a6, sacrificing an exchange and trying to pretend he has some play for the exchange. Was much easier to pretend so when computers were not so powerful. Now, actually, well, according to engines, white is much better in this position. So ed5 is very annoying, but maybe even simpler is bishop b5 check. And now in case of knight c6, ed5, knight d5, we transpose to a position which is simply better for white. And after bishop d7, e5 seems to be a very, very unpleasant, because after bishop b5, knight b5, let's say a6, knight c3, wherever black goes with his knight, white just proceeds with e6, let's say castle, rook e1, and black's position is, well, pretty critical here. So again, knight f6, I wouldn't recommend really, because, well, e5 is quite dangerous, and knight c3, probably you just have to transpose to the main Sicilians. And then what else? There is a g6 move. A g6 move which makes some sense. Well, black wants to play accelerated dragon, so to say. The idea is that after d4, cd, knight d4, black wants to play bishop g7, knight c6, and this position, this system, it's not really dragon because pawn is on d7. We will analyze it in depth in our next lesson, one of the next lessons. So black wants to get this, but to avoid the system, because normally black is trying to get this via knight c6, but trying to avoid bishop b5 system. But it gives white a choice of quite nice options. First of all, you can play c4, bishop g7, d4, and move into this typical Maroczy system, which again we are going to consider later. But in fact, d4, cd, already queen takes d4 is pretty unpleasant for black. Knight f6, and now knight c3. I'm not quite sure black fully equalizes after e5, knight c6, queen a4, knight d5, and so on. White has quite a number of moves here, but maybe still it's not so easy for black to equalize. But actually knight c3 move is very unpleasant. White simply wants to play e5, after knight c6, queen a4, and it seems to me that e5 is a very big threat. So, for instance, you cannot really continue development. playing bishop g7 because e5 and you have to go to g8 and white is just better. That's why d6 seems to be the only reasonable move. And now white just goes e5. And let's say probably black has to play like this. And then white has two bishops. Let's say knight takes d7, bishop b5, or queen takes d7, bishop e3, followed by rook d1. White is simply slightly better with no risk, very comfortable plus. So this d4 is big enough reason, I think, for black to think twice should he play g6 on move 2. But also c3 probably gives white a very pleasant plus. That's how I played, by the way, once in rapid chess in Baku against an Azerbaijani grandmaster. I won quite easily the game because, okay, what to do now? If knight f6, obviously e5, d4, this is already a big difference compared to the e4, c5, c3 system because g6 is not a good move here. And after cd, white is better whether he plays like this or maybe even stronger is queen takes d4. And now queen h4, bishop c4, and computer already gives a considerable advantage to white in this position. Then what else after c3? White just wants to get the center. So if bishop g7, d4 takes, d5, e5, white is better. Or let's say d5 immediately, it leads to the same. At least maybe you don't immediately put the bishop on g7. But here actually both e d5 is a very safe way to play, queen d5, d4. And let's say bishop g7, knight bd2, for example. And this position computer claims a nice comfortable plus for white. Which is logical because black lost time with Tempest with his queen. But more principle maybe is to play e5 and then bishop g4, d4, let's say knight c6, bishop b5. I think that was the position, if I remember correctly, of my game, and I won it quite convincingly. I think white is better here because, of course, if pawn would be on e6 instead of, and black's pawn on g7, so if e6 instead of g6 would be played, it would be fine for black most of the time. But here the problem is that bishop cannot retreat anymore. So whenever white would play h3, black will have to give up this bishop taking on f3, and that usually leads with a space advantage to a very comfortable game for white. So g6 is also not, I wouldn't really recommend. Therefore, there are only three major moves left: knight c6, d6, e6. All other moves are at best playable, but definitely white has a plus there. There is no doubt about it. So if you are studying Sicilian for the white color, well, that's already enough knowledge for you to play. All those sidelines, it's clear that white has a comfortable game. If you are studying with black, maybe you can pick up one of those moves for a blitz game. But all in all, I would advise you to stick to the major lines, so now I'm going to explain you the structure, more or less, what are the possible systems black has in the Sicilian, and what are the transpositions, move orders. And then from the next lesson, we will proceed with the theoretical knowledge of those lines step by step. So let us start with knight f3, e6. d4. Well, white has some sidelines such as g3. I'm going to show you, of course, all of those. b3. Maybe the most serious sideline is playing c3 here, which reminds the e4, c5, c3 system, but black has a more limited choice here than in that system. So those are the sidelines, but let's say if white is playing the main line, d4, c4, knight d4, then now black has quite a big choice of moves. Let's say a6. Yeah, let's start with a6. This is so-called Paulsen system. So the idea is, in case of knight c3, black is playing with a b5 immediately, trying to play bishop b7, and only then already having the pawn on b5, trying to develop his king side, or queen c7, a very flexible move. So quite often it's very flexible setup, sometimes getting to Scheveningen, to Sicilians, Scheveningen, this pawn structure when black goes knight f6 and d6. Well, I will tell you details about it later, but that is the idea. So for black, playing a6 or knight c3, of course, if black can play knight c6, but this we will consider via the knight c6 move order. But a6, there are two moves which I consider to be quite dangerous for black. One is bishop d3. Now already white is actually most of the time trying to put the pawn on c4. Yeah, and then because in general it's when in those quite rare occasions when white can manage to play c4, knight c3, it gives him more space, more control on the center. So bishop d3 is a very serious system. And another which became now very popular, I played myself quite a lot, c4 immediately. This system. So that move order gives white a chance to play with c4. The setups with c4, but it's a big sphere and it's definitely a very playable system, Paulsen. For instance, Caruana plays it from time to time, Peter Swidler. Yeah, a serious system with a lot of theory. So that is one option. Another option, you can play knight f6, knight c3, and now let's say both d6 or knight c6, we will, knight c6, we will consider it via the knight c6 move order. This is one system. Another system is to play d6, so-called, Scheveningen. Why Scheveningen? Because it's a place somewhere in Europe where for the first time somebody played this kind of setup in Sicilian, just with pawns on d6 and e6, and it started to become popular, and it's still popular. I mean, it became clear that this seemingly, unambitious and defensive setup, in fact, has a lot of venom, and it's very difficult not to crack when black is playing Sicilian like this. But in this particular move order, now it becomes not very fashionable because, white has as major systems. Again, white has many other systems as well, but the major dangers are bishop e3 system, then f3, let's say queen d2, long castle. And another, the most challenging and the most dangerous is g4. Keres attack, so-called. I think Paul Keres was the first one who started to play like this. At that time, it was pretty revolutionary just to start pushing your pawns before developing pieces. But nowadays, it's supposed to be quite a problem for black. And according to the state of theory, black is experiencing serious problems after g4. So this move order is not very popular nowadays. But then what else? Knight c6. Yeah, this is a very flexible way of playing. Of course, you understand that you can also play via knight c6, second knight c6. So let me start explaining you the move orders. Let's say second knight c6, and in case of d4 takes, you can play e6 here. The question, if you decide to play like this, so you need to choose what sideline is you feel more comfortable with, because after knight c6 there is, for instance, bishop b5, a very, very serious sideline, which now maybe becomes even the main line. There are much more people on the top level playing bishop b5 than d4 after knight c6. A very serious system. So, or let's say after e6, as I've mentioned already, white has different systems like c3 or b3. So it's, if you play like this, then how to get to this position, it's a matter of taste for black. But in any case, if we are there already, then normally white plays knight c3. Another big system is knight b5. Immediately here d6, and then white has an option to play like this, but I think black is doing fine here. And another option is to play c4 and trying to build the center. Of course, losing some tempies because, knight has to retreat to a3, but doing everything to stop d5, even though here d5 is still possible. As we know by the very famous and I would say evergreen game Karpov-Kasparov from the World Championship match in 1985, which Kasparov won in a brilliant style. Still, d5 is not winning by force, of course. But all in all, knight b5 is a serious line, but in general, black is doing fine here. So the main move is knight c3. And now black has a choice. He can play d6, and this is a better version of this Scheveningen. It's better if you're already playing d6 than to play with knight on c6 and knight on f6, because now g4 is still a serious move, but at least not threatening g5, attacking the knight on f6. So black is usually playing like this, a6, and then trying to develop knight to e7. Still, it's not clear at all if black is equalizing here. But okay, white has a big choice of systems. Of course, always possible bishop e2 castle, always possible to put bishop on c4 as well. And again, if white plays bishop e3, knight f6, f3, then we have this important position, which I'm going to analyze. We are going to study it later. It's playable for black, but quite dangerous also. So that is about d6, one possible system. Another system is a6, playing like this. It's kind of mixture between Taimanov and Paulsen. So a game can sometimes in some line transpose to Taimanov system, which is queen c7 move as a main move in this position. Or it can get to separately, a separate way. Like, for example, take on 6 bishop d3. It's a position of the system, quite a important theoretical position with lots of games, d5. All in all, I believe a6 is definitely playable. And, for example, Jan Nepomniachtchi played it. Again, Peter Svidler played a lot of this system and other strong players. It's playable, there will be no refutation of it, but white has quite a choice of interesting continuations here, so it's not so easy to equalize also with black. But the main move probably is queen c7, so-called Taimanov system, with a lot of theory here, and white has a big choice. Well, now already knight takes e6 obviously is not so good, because bc and queen c7 is much more useful than a6. Black will follow with d5 and having no problem. But white has a huge choice, so this here we'll have a long lesson explaining the situation on the queen c7. So this is probably the major system after e6. So now let's move to move knight c6. Here, as I explained already, most of the time, I think black plays knight c6 because he wants to play Sveshnikov system, which is doing pretty well now. It's quite difficult for white to get an advantage. So let's say if white is playing d4, cd4, knight d4, now black, of course, as we know already, can transpose by playing e6. There is another system, g6, so trying to play this accelerated dragon. It's called like this for some reason, at least it used to be called like this in my childhood, with a pawn on d7, which gives white additional possibilities, but actually the main point that black is trying to avoid the setup when white tries to play f3, queen d2, long castle, because now black will just play d5 straight away. But g6, most of the time white is playing c4, this so-called Maratsi system, so trying to get control, because black haven't played knight c6, knight f6, so knight c3 is not played yet, so white is using this moment to play c4 followed by knight c3, and again it's a big system, quite solid for black but a bit passive. So all in all, I believe that white keeps a certain quite nice positional advantage. The game is usually slow, positional, playable for black, but little passive. On the top level, not very popular, because still probably doesn't fully equalize, but on a certain level it can be a good weapon, because black is having no weaknesses, and you need to master the position very well with white in order to get something in this system. So it's a possible option for black if he plays knight c6. Then another line is to play e5. Knight b5, d6. We can call it accelerated Sveshnikov. So black is trying to play without knight on f6. Why it gives white an option to play c4, and then black usually plays bishop e7. There is a big theory. Again, it's pretty solid for black. It doesn't look so good because of d5 square, but strangely enough, is not that bad. And because frankly, it looks this position like white should be better. Maybe he is slightly better, but no more than that. I mean, it is playable for black, even though not to my taste, a bit passive. But also the problem, I think that simply if white is playing knight c3 here, I'm not quite sure that black has anything really better than, to play maybe knight f6, because the idea was originally that black is playing like this, b5, and after knight d5, trying to play different systems like knight g7, but all those moves seems not to be working so well now for black. So e5 system is in a bit of a crisis now. Knight b5 d6, not only because c4 is a very serious move, but also that after knight c3, those ideas to have a little bit kind of special Sveshnikov variation might not work. So maybe black should simply move to Sveshnikov variation, then probably it's simpler already to play knight f6 first, not to give additional possibilities for white. So knight f6, knight c3. And now, well, e5. d6, this is a rouser system. The main line is bishop g5, even though, of course, the other moves I will explain you in detail. I used to play a lot rouser in the 90s. It's now, popularity of rouser is getting back, so quite many strong players are playing it back now. So very big series. This is a very big serious system for black. Perfectly playable, obviously, even though, I mean, maybe it's not so easy to equalize. I mean, white is, according to the state of theory, white is having some, there are some dangerous options from the white side, but a very big system, d6. Again, you can get it via the move order. If you want already to play rouser, you can start with d6, and in case of d4, you can play here knight c6, That is another way to get it. Again, it's about what do you fear more? Sidelines after d6 or sidelines after knight c6. Otherwise, it's up to black to choose how to get this position. After, let's say, this rouser, so-called rouser position. Another move is e6. Well, I will try to explain you the idea of e6. First of all, the idea is quite often is to get simply in case of knight db5 move. Because if bishop e2, for instance, it's not easy for white to get this bishop e2 classical systems, because black seems to be doing fine after bishop b4. And in case of knight db5, black can always play d6, and the idea is that after bishop f4, e5, bishop g5, we get to a classical Sveshnikov system. Only that black avoided some lines, like I will explain you later. So certain lines like e5, let's say knight db5, d6. For instance, there is quite a serious and fashionable line now to play like this: knight d5 takes. Knight d8 now played, or knight e7. So that is avoided, but it gives, and also, by the way, on top of it, bishop b4 move is not easy to refute. This bishop b4 system was considered always a bit passive and slightly better for white. The main move is a3, takes d5, but nowadays engines are actually starting to equalize here with black, and it's quite difficult also to get an advantage with white. So after knight db5, black can move to the Sveshnikov variation or play bishop b4. The major move after e6 is knight takes e6, and this position bc e5, knight d5, knight e4, it's pretty forced, and it was always considered to be a bit dubious for black, but lately there are some new ideas computers, modern engines found, and there is still a discussion if white has something or black finally manages to equalize. So it's becoming quite a fashionable line, because if this line is fine for black, then of course it's a very, very serious system. But most of the time, black would play e5 here. That is the main system, Sveshnikov. who played it all his life and actually developed the whole theory, in this pre-computer era. He was maybe the only one who understood back in the 60s or 70s that actually weakening d5 square is not so dramatic in this position in Sicilians. Now everybody knows it already. And the main line goes like knight db5 d6, and now of course it's a very very big theory, knight d5, but main move is bishop g5, a6, knight a3, and so on. This big tabia, which we are going to, of course, to study as well. So that is another big system for black. And if black wants to play this Sveshnikov with e5, then he has to start with knight c6. There is no other move order he can get this position with second knight c6. And that's why, especially because in Sveshnikov now, white is experiencing problems to get any advantage. There are two very serious sidelines white play, trying to avoid Sveshnikov, trying to play whether bishop b5. I cannot even anymore call it a sideline, because actually it becomes even more popular than d4 nowadays on the top level. And black is experiencing quite some troubles, equalizing here. It doesn't mean that white is better. Black has his chances to equalize, but bishop b5 is a very, very serious move. Now most of, main moves are e6 or g6, two main moves. A lot of theory here, we are going to study it, of course, as well. Another, way of trying to avoid this main Sveshnikov is playing knight c3. I myself played a lot. This move was extremely popular some 15 years ago. Because the problem is that knight f6, if black is trying, to get his Sveshnikov, if d4 now, then he wants to take and play e5. That is the idea. But now bishop b5 seems to be quite serious, and at the current state of theory, I think black is experiencing problems here. There is no way found for black to equalize after bishop b5 yet. Then there is a radical way of playing, which is just e5, stopping d4 for once and for all. Of course, at the same time weakening the d5 square, bishop c4, d6, d3. Lots of games I played with both colors and many other top players. Very big system. Play reminds more quite often Ruy Lopez than Sicilian. What can I say? Black is quite solid. Good chances to equalize here, but white has his also attempts, and it's not totally clear yet if black fully equalizes after e5. Very popular now, g6 becomes very popular, because in case of, let's say, bishop b5, bishop g7, knight on c3 is a bit premature. And black is doing fine here, according to theory. So probably white's best is to play d4, and now we get to seemingly dragon, but not dragon, not completely, because bishop e3, knight f6, it's a separate system actually, because if white is trying to do the same thing like f3, queen d2, now it doesn't work because black simply plays d5. The pawn is not on d6 yet, so black is just at least equal here. That's why white has quite many options here. We are going to study this position, of course, but that is one of the serious ways to face knight c3. So you see how both players are trying to trick each other, trying to make use of move orders. So white is playing knight c3, for instance, here, trying to avoid Sveshnikov, but in case of d6 or e6, he wants just to play d4 and move to the main Sicilians. But black in return now already playing g6, because if you remember, I've mentioned that in case if black plays g6 here, if knight c3, bishop g7, that would lead to the same position. But now white has c4, Maratsi system, which is considered to be very dangerous for black. Not easy to equalize. So that is why it's actually important to know at least a little bit all the Sicilians, that you can understand all those move orders and all those ways how one of the player trying to avoid one system but allowing another system. That's why I believe this general survey which I'm giving you now on before we study each of those lines in detail, it's quite useful that you have a structure in your mind why this or that move order is played. So that is about knight c6, I think. And finally, last but not least, d6 move. Well, most of the time it's played because black wants to play neither. There are some sidelines like c3, other moves, but they don't seem to be extremely dangerous. Another sideline is d4, cd. Sometimes white takes with a queen on d4. Playable, but no more than that. Bishop b5 check here is maybe the most popular and serious sideline. Still, there is nothing dramatic for black for sure. Let's say bishop d7 was always the main line. Now knight d7 becomes more popular, actually. Here, white takes. By the way, knight takes d7 instead of queen d7, also possible. And white trying to play c4, knight c3, then d4, and well, fighting for a small advantage. Here, sometimes getting it, sometimes not, but it's pretty playable for white, even though definitely not a drama for black either, yeah. But now knight d7 becomes more and more popular because it leads to a more complicated game, and that is usually the case if you are playing neither or Rouser. You want a double-edged complicated game, and knight d7 is maybe a little bit less, so to say, bulletproof, but it gives black more chances to fight for a win, and in general, according to modern state of theory, black is doing pretty fine after knight d7. So there are no sidelines which are very dangerous after d6. I just would like to mention that knight c6 here, or as you understand, we can get this position via second knight c6, third knight b5, d6. It's used to be quite popular, but now it's in trouble, I believe, after castles. Bishop d7 usually played rook e1. It's quite difficult for black to equalize here, so for the moment it's out of fashion. It seems that it's not the best way to face bishop b5 systems. So then after d4, cd, knight d4, knight f6, there is a certain move f3. You need to know what to do with black against it. It's quite serious, but black can equalize, I think, after f3. So the main move is knight c3, and now, of course, you can play e6, as I've mentioned it via the move order second e6. Nowadays, not very popular, mainly because of this g4, which is very dangerous, and black is not doing great here, according to theory. Then, of course, knight c6 is Rouser if you want to play. So this is another way, even more popular, to get to Rouser via d6 move order, because I think d6 bishop b5 check is less dangerous than knight c6 bishop b5. So if you want to play Rouser with black, you choose whether you start with knight c6 or with d6. Then, of course, there is a evergreen dragon, g6. This is a so-called dragon system. Well, it's not too popular on the top level now, although definitely playable if you know it well, definitely playable on the lower levels or shorter time controls. The most challenging, dangerous system is playing bishop e3, f3, followed by queen d2, long castle. Well, what can I say? I think objectively black experiencing some problems here. I mean, of course, the game is very sharp. Here, the knowledge of theory, very detailed knowledge, is very important, especially if you decide to play it with black. You really need to know it by heart. I mean, a lot of long lines, because, okay, white's plan is simple. He wants to play long castle and then h4, h5, and very often one inaccuracy and you just get mated there. But there is a lot of theory, and still it's not refuted, let's put it this way. Dragon is not refuted, but very, very risky opening to play. So, and the main then a6, yeah, this is a Najdorf according to Visha Anand once, he told me a long time ago in a private conversation, we were talking about different Sicilians. And I remember he told me, there are many playable Sicilians, but neither is the best. And, I don't know best or not best, but it's, the fact that Robert James Fisher used to play it, Garry Kasparov played it with a lot of success all his life, means that it's very serious. Neither is a very serious Sicilian. A lot of theory here. Of course, we are going to study it. At least in general, what are the directions, what are the possible continuations, prospectors for each site. So that is another system. That is the overview I decided to give to you before we go on and we study it one by one, all those variations of Sicilian, because I believe it's important that you have it in your mind, you have the structure of the full opening. That will make you, it will make it easier to, so to say, digest the material and understand when we start studying, each of the lines, to understand what are the move orders and who is aiming for what, who is trying to get this line to avoid another line, etc., etc. So I think that is a general knowledge I gave you. You need to have before studying with either color, especially of course with white, but even with black. If you decide only to play one system, still it's good to know the structure of all other possible variations in Sicilian. And from the next lesson we will start to move to the theory. First, I would try to give you sidelines against each of those moves, knight c6, d6, e6, and then we move to the variations where white is playing d4 and playing the main Sicilians.